And now we have the details worksheet. The details worksheet is a summary of all your actual entries. That includes both income and expenses, and it also includes credit card transactions. So the details worksheet shows you everything in your past, the actual entries, whereas the dashboard helps you evaluate what you're going to do in the future. I'm going to look at the table component first. So we scroll down and here's the table. If you look at the header items, these are the different months, including the 2 months of the next year. But there are also references for the yearly total and for the monthly average over that entire year. But note that the total and the average, they exclude the 2 months of the next year. They're only for the current year. Let's look at the contents of the table. Again, use the plus sign on the left to expand the information. And the first thing you see is state, year, and month. The color coding you should be familiar with now, green for actual, blue for forecast. On this sheet, I actually identify it as future, and it also has the month references as well. Let's look at the account activity. What you'll notice here is that the references for account activity are all exactly the same references as the dashboard. Now, although they're the same references, it's not the same information exactly. So specifically, we talk about the items above the line. So here's our line. Above the line, we have starting balance, transactions, and ending balance. The starting balance will reflect starting balance the same as the dashboard for actual entries. But for the forecast entries, the details worksheet does not pull from the monthly template for that information. It only uses actual information. The same with the ending balance. Now what's interesting is the transactions. The transactions will only look at information for actual occurrences. Now, what that means is items above the line here, starting balance, transactions, and ending balance, will not necessarily match what you see on the dashboard. However, the items below the line, the monthly minimum balance, the monthly maximum balance, and the two warnings for account balance, balance reached, and the warning for the minimum, those will always match the dashboard. Let's look at the credit card information. The information for the credit cards is going to display, again, exactly the same way. So if we look at the example we used previously for Visa, you'll see there's balance, due date, cycle start, and cycle end. So all of this information will match exactly what appears on the dashboard. Now, one thing to note, on the dashboard, I mentioned if you have variances with any of the dates, due date, cycle start date, cycle end date, you can manually modify that date. You should only do that on the dashboard, never on the details worksheet. And that's because when you make the modification on the dashboard, it will already be reflected on the details sheet. So let's look at an example. If we go to dashboard, and let's say we change the due date for the Visa. Instead of the 15th of February, let's make it the 20th of February. So first, check on details. It says 15th of February. If we change that to the 20th of February and check out the details, it's already reflected. So you only make the change on the dashboard. So let's look at yearly totals. You'll see on the right, we have yearly totals and averages for a number of items. That includes credit cards. So this can be very useful if you wanted to track, say, a cashback card, rewards, or travel points. You could actually confirm that your points or your cashback accumulation is accurate because you'll have the annual totals here. You'll just have to check the dates on when the credit cards apply the cash rewards or the travel points. Now let's look at the detail information. So below the account activity and the credit cards, we have two broad categories, income and expenses. If we expand expenses, you'll see it's further divided by other subcategories. And within those subcategories are the true subcategories. I say true categories as these are the references that will appear in drop-down selections in the Daily Transactions worksheet. Now, each colored entry here has a roll-up sum. So this is going to contain the sum of all the entries in the particular grouping. There's a further roll-up to expenses. Expenses will contain the sum of all the entries below it. Now, how does all of this fit into the account activity? Well, don't forget we need to include the credit card entries here. So if you look at the transaction, you might think the transactions should be just the sum of income plus expenses. But remember that you do have to pay the credit card bill, and we have to account for all of these different references. So the transaction is basically everything totaled in the income section plus everything totaled in the expenses section, and then minus all of the credit card payments. So this way we avoid double entries. Remember, you have to watch out for double entries for credit card transactions that are logged in other locations. So if you do that math, you'll see it matches across the transaction references here. What's important to note is there's never a situation where you need to manually update anything in this table. This table is standalone. You should only be looking at the entries that exist here. They're not for manual update. Now let's take a peek at this pie chart. As you might have expected, this pie chart is about the distribution of activity in that table. However, if you notice the title, the distribution in this pie chart is for expenses only, not for your income. So that's already been excluded from what's displayed here. The blocks on the right work in exactly the same fashion as the blocks on the dashboard worksheet. You simply select the entries you want displayed, and the pie chart will reflect that information. So for example, if we wanted to display both January and February, then you'll see that information is reflected in the pie chart. It is reflected immediately. However, just as with the dashboard, if you make a modification in the Daily Transactions worksheet, you'll need to refresh this pie chart because this is actually a pivot chart. So again, how would you do that? When you've clicked on the chart, you'll notice you have additional navigation items. Click on Analyze and click Refresh, just as we did before with the other pivot tables. It's the same for a pivot chart. Now you might find sometimes the colors in the pie chart are very similar, and it might not be obvious right away which category is which, even though the legend is included. All you need to do is hover over the pie. So for example, You'll see this pie is for housing, and that is the blue. This small purple is for home expenses versus this purple is for saving and investing. So that's an easy way to identify which pie color is which category. And you might notice on the right, there seem to be some additional selections in the blocks. This is a side effect of the structure of the spreadsheet. And unfortunately, I was unable to find a manner to remove it for the display. So in order to avoid disrupting the other data, I've left it there. But generally, if you don't want any bizarre blank labeled data, then don't select those items and everything is fine. So that's it for the details worksheet. Remember, details are all about looking at your past and seeing what's happened, whereas the dashboard is more about evaluating your future and what's happening with the account. And that's everything for this tutorial.